Thank you, Alison and Ron, on behalf of the Center, putting this on. Thank you, Ron, too, for having so seriously dug into the material. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, Will. I noticed only one thing that I seriously disagreed with in your remarks. Is when you said that the book came to be because we persisted. It came to be because you persisted. We both wrote what we wrote. But everybody who's ever published something here knows that that's not how a book becomes. There's an immense amount of work beyond that. Will did all of that, all of it. I'm immensely grateful for that. And I also want to thank you for tonight's remarks. I think you've taken our discussion hugely beyond where it ended in the book. If I were to say have a transcript of your remarks, and we would use that as a chapter in the next book, I would have very many not only appreciative comments, but also a lot of affirmations of fundamental agreement, much more so than we had in the book. So I really appreciate your remarks. This is probably the last kick at the can for me, at this particular can. Although you never know. In 2003, I forget which book it was that was launched, that I had either written or had a part in. And then I said, well, this will be the last time. But behold, it's 10 years later, and here's another one. But what I would like to do is say something about the key concerns that I had in my career in dealing with these matters of belief and faith. And well, you'll see. My concern about that very important strand in Western religious traditions that sees faith and religion as at its core having to do with beliefs, I consider that not only to be mistaken, but harmful. It was something that I thought we needed to deal with. Faith, fundamentally perceived as orthodoxy, it could have been just, some phase in the historical development of Christianity that had its differences with the past, and also its rich gifts. But it was more going on than just that. To mention an example that came to me as I was preparing these remarks, I don't think Western liberalism and its privatization of religion is thinkable without the history of religion as orthodoxy, because that's what people began to fight about and had religious wars about that had to be settled in some way. And making faith, beliefs private was thought to be a pretty good approach to that kind of thing. And I come from a tradition in which the privatization of religion is conceived as very harmful. not only to ourselves, but only to the entire religious tradition. So, but I think it's important to realize that I dealt with this material not primarily and only because I had problems with it. A deeper motivation was to create, that comes out much more in the second book, in the tightrope book, to create a level playing field. That is to say, to create an image and a picture of religion that would make Kai Nielsen a co-religionist, atheist that he was, so that we could talk on a level playing field. That was a very important motivation, to say we need to get beyond this conversation about beliefs, and we need to get to deeper levels of things that we're talking about. So, now, this complaint about Western religion having been too deeply influenced by the strand that characterizes it primarily as orthodoxy, that's now very widely shared. Everybody says that. And it's also widely agreed upon. When at some point Leslie Newbigin wrote a new book and began that book with this story about the influence of Greek thought on the formation of Western religion as primarily oriented to beliefs. When he did that, I thought, well, okay, so that's a battle that we don't need to any longer. It's not quite true. If any of you here know the story of Rob Bell and the book Love Wins, it was a very important event in the evangelical world in the U.S. I think it was a wonderful book. I think Rob was an exemplary pastor whose work with his congregation had all sorts of fantastic blessings, but it had implications for Orthodox beliefs, and he was hunted and persecuted and left the area where he wrote his book and went to the West. So it's not totally over yet. It still happens. But, so, I keep recommending for people who would like to have another kind of exposure to this whole idea, besides philosophical treatises, to go and see the movie Of Gods and Men, which is all about Western religion as the love of God, which contains deep discussion of that position, and which shows that position as deeply rooted in the liturgy. These men, these monks in Algiers living among Muslims in the village where they served, ultimately their stance led to their death. They took their faith that seriously. But it'd be very difficult, to deny what you see in that film as an authentic example of what religion is all about, and to say at the same time, this is not about beliefs. This is a way different story. And that may in part be due to the fact that it's not a treatise, it's not a philosophical discussion, It's an example of their life. Very important example. So let me just briefly try to recapitulate two of the main elements of all the time that I've spent on this issue. I do indeed take, I know that it's used in different ways, but my own take on the important use of belief in Western philosophy is that it is a name for attitudes toward propositions. A belief signifies the acceptance of someone's understanding of a state of affairs, and to assent to that understanding of the state of affairs as being such and such. I think that religion is full of beliefs. And when Ron says that he doesn't think that I pay any attention to it, it's not important for me, I take all the blame for that. I'm sure that has something to do with the way in which I present that issue in the book. But religion, of course, is chock full of beliefs, and they're important to religion. Without all those beliefs, the religion wouldn't be in its fullness what it is. But I also think that those beliefs in religion are of no more importance to religion, except in our Western tradition, than they are in the life of a composer or an orchestra conductor. And we don't read in-depth accounts of a composer or an orchestra conductor's beliefs and discuss them whether they're right or wrong and whatever. But their lives are as full of beliefs as are the lives of religious persons. I think in those lives they take their proper place, as they should in the life of faith. So there's a perception, Ron showed that in his response, but I think it's there in Will's book too. And again, I take the blame for that, for the way I write. But I'd like to open that up a little. I do not believe in beliefs as the completely abstract layers of human experience that might be thought, the way Ron painted it. And to give you an idea of that, let me unpack a little more an example that I give in the Tightrope. My struggle with trying to decide whether a bird I'm seeing is an alder or not, an alder flycatcher. Alder flycatchers are... Can you give me some water?
A cup of water for you.
Alder flycatchers are one of 5 members of a group of flycatchers called Emeritus. They're notoriously difficult to distinguish. And in the fall, the alder and the willow flycatcher are totally impossible to distinguish unless you would hear them sing. But they don't sing in the fall, by and large. So, what you going to do? Well, you say, I saw an Emeritus flycatcher. That's one of 5, but you don't know which one it was. But now take this event. I am with my friend Nigel Weaver. I say, Nigel, that's an alder. He said, why would you think so? Well, I said, I heard it. That in itself, of course, is a dubious contribution to the discussion because I'm very hard of hearing. But Nigel says, Henk, this is entirely the wrong territory, the wrong habitat. I said, well, Nigel, it's migration time. And so you can expect them anywhere. And I really think it briefly sang, and I heard what would have been an alder. Well, the discussion continues for a while, and Nigel proudly said when he came home to Pat, well, Henk thought he saw an alder. And she said, what do you think? This little example illustrates, I'll get to that in a minute, but at least three important dimensions of the richness of coming to form and holding a belief. There are very important perceptual elements, vision and auditory perception. I have to see that it was an alder, that it was possibly an alder anyway, and I have to hear that it was an alder. And I have to have, so these perceptual elements are very important. Furthermore, to use Quinian language, the web of beliefs in relation to seeing an alder becomes very important. How does this fit into that web of beliefs? Well, when Nigel and I argue about his saying it's a bad habitat, but my saying, but it's migration time, all those kinds of discussions, they have to do with understanding the proposition, understanding my saying, I heard an alder, I see an alder, that is an alder. My assertion has to fit into that web of beliefs. But that wouldn't get me any farther than a complexity of perceptions and a complexity of understandings. There is also, having nothing to do with whether it's a belief of faith or not, there is a very important fiduciary element in coming to form and holding a belief. Because at some point, I have to say to Nigel, I believe it's an alder, Nigel. And that, as our discussion shows, is not given with all our understandings and all our perceptions. I need to move beyond that to an acceptance of what I think that all comes to. So even inside the abstract structure of a belief, there is a fiduciary element. There's an element of faith, element of assent, an element of acceptance, whatever you might call it. And there is so much more going on there. If it wouldn't have been me going bird watching with Nigel, but Roger Torrey Peterson, and Roger Torrey Peterson would have said, I hear an alder, Nigel wouldn't ever have said, I don't think so. He would have been a fool. Roger Torrey Peterson would take people on birding expeditions, never see anything, just walk at a considerable pace and tell everybody what he heard. He knew every bird by their sound. And reliably so. So, the issue of my account, Nigel's account, not all that authoritative. Peterson's would have been very authoritative. How about, you can sort of sense it, right? That what Will was talking about. There is a lot of excitement going on in forming and accepting or rejecting that belief. Goodness grief. Coming in the fall to the conclusion that it's seen an alder, for a bird watcher, that's an event. You know, you tell other bird watchers about that. It's not that abstract. And how about tradition? There's a famous story. About 30 years ago, a well-known bird watcher from Ottawa was on his way at Christmas time to Windsor to be with his family. And he heard on the radio that a temic stint had been seen in Ottawa. So he drove straight to Windsor, dropped off his family, and turned right around to go back to Windsor to see this temic stint. You can't sort of say, you know, I'll come and see that bird on Boxing Day or 3 days later, then it may be gone. And having a temic stint in Ottawa on your life list? So, he drives back and he sees it and utterly satisfied. He has a wonderful Christmas. And the bird stays. He could have not, you know, he could have stayed in Windsor. The bird stays. So there's always a little crowd standing around where the temic stint is being seen. Here comes this 14-year-old kid who was new to the world of bird watching, and he says to this older guy, "Now, where again did you say it was?" And the guy says, "Well, he hasn't looked through a scope," and he explains it. And the boy says, "And how did you tell that it was a temic stint?" "Well, it has something to do with a small spot of different coloration in a certain place on the stint's body." So the fellow explains that, and the boy says, "I don't see it." Holy Pete. So the old man goes behind the scope. He doesn't see it either. All these top-notch birders had for days on end been seeing a temic stint, but it wasn't there. Some guy who first saw what he thought was a temic stint reported it, and desire became the origin of this belief, which is not so unusual to having beliefs, religious belief included. All these things are part and parcel of the world of belief, even when we abstractly zero in on them. Ron reads Will as saying the world of belief is way more complex and full-bodied than I have portrayed it, and that's probably true. But I do believe the same thing. It is very full-bodied. If we have problems now with going into the world of religion and discussing beliefs having this kind of a different status, that probably has to do with our acculturation to this tradition so deeply that it's very difficult for us to hear otherwise. So when Will says, at some point I detected that in Hink's account, faith seemed to have no content, my first response would be to say, that's good, because that's not a metaphor I would use to talk about faith. That metaphor of having content comes out of the conceptual world, and for behaviors rooted in commitments, having content is not the most felicitous term to use to try to get what is going on there. Now, Alison promised me over dinner that when I had talked long enough, she would stop me. Because this can go on and on. I can go on and on, but I know there's a point where you get bored. So whether we reach that point or not, this is what I had to say.